Okay, so I have been doing some research and note taking, making my next video, and this video is going to be on the plumed serpents gods, or the winged serpents, or the feathered serpents, or the flying serpent gods. Depends on how you translate them, but they're all pretty much translated into plumed, which means feathered or winged, and serpents. But that's pretty prominent through every ancient religion across the globe, and we're going to talk about each one of these gods and their names and how they tie in with one another, with similarities of the current religions that we currently worship today as a whole. Like I'm not saying we as a group of Americans or a group of people, we as a whole society of Earth, what we collectively believe is all tied to one central belief system that originated and started everything. And this is the evidence that others have gathered, and some evidence I've gathered or pieced the evidences together. But so let's talk about the earliest civilizations known to man that we know today. The first known civilization, advanced civilization with temples and city centers and laws and stuff like that we know, dates back to 6,000 to 6,500 years ago. That modern archaeology, there's a lot of current archaeologists and researchers that kind of say that civilization is older than that, and we're going to talk about other things such as sites that date back before that, that say that the Sumerians actually came after, and that's what we're going to also get into, like where is this legacy of the creation of mankind and come from, and where do these creators, quote unquote, and or people who gift us knowledge, or gods or beings, however you want to label them as, who like they all have the same beginning. So first, the Sumerians. How I'm going to break these down. Actually, I put some notes up. So some of them, how I pronounce words, I break them up by periods, and I'm going to show you kind of my first note card. You can kind of see through it actually, but the first group of letters or letter is Sumerian. Let me backtrack. Sumerian, Babylonian, anything with ancient cuneiform script, which is the precursor, the pre-written language to most of the languages of the ancient Near East and Asia Minor and India. Like the cuneiform alphabet, the written thing was written in wet clay tablets with like reeds, and they make these dashes and these triangular marks and these little symbols. It looks very alien, like an alien language, like something you'd see on a spaceship in a sci-fi movie. If you want to see what that is, it's cuneiform. Um, I could spell it, but I don't think you guys would really need to. I don't know if you're gonna look into it, but cuneiform script was syllabic, and that script, that written script, has been changed, and over time, the phonetic what's the word I want, progressions throughout time, throughout different civilizations, they changed the names, and slowly we have like words that are rooted in all languages that tie back to these. Okay, so now, anyways, this is my first one. So the first one is Sumerian, and we're going to talk about the god Ea. Eve is the first syllable, and after the period is the second syllable. So the Enki. So Ea, or Enki, was the Sumerian god. He was actually, his, like, when he was like depicted in his anthropomorphic form, his body form on arts, he wasn't really shown too much as a snake, so to say, with wings. He had wings and some. And he also had some fish, like like a fish garb type of thing. So I mean, but he was the starter of civilization. We're going to talk about this now. Enki. In one of my previous videos, if you watch it, you remember Tiamat and Ki, the two planets. Ki means Earth. Now, Ki in that language, Ki means Earth, or the planet, the name of the Earth. So En, his first part of his name, we're not talking about the Iya, we're talking about his other name, Enki. En means Lord. He has a brother named Enlil. Enlil, En, Lord, Lil, skies. Lord of the skies, Lord of the heavens, however you want to call it. And Ki was the Lord of the earth. His real name was Iya. Like, that's what I'm guessing. They have many different names, but I think a title is what they would have. Kind of like you'd have a title of like general or title of commander in the military or something similar type of thing, or admiral. Lord was of whatever. And then like the female gods, they all started their names. They all started with Nin, which means lady, lady of. Like Ninki was Enki's wife, and she had the Lady of Earth. So that wasn't really her name, or his name wasn't Enki. That was just his title, Lord of the Earth or God of the Earth. And the Sumerians, the Babylonians, all of them didn't really give the names of like their gods, so to say, but it's kind of suggested that they had names, but they never gave the names to them or out to them. So now we're going to go to the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Babylonians and Assyrians are a part of the Akkadians. They came after the Sumerians. So the Sumerians did the very first form of the pictographic alphabet or the alphabet, cuneiform script alphabet. They started that in the language, and the Babylonians and the Assyrians, they spoke pretty much the same language. That their languages are considered a group language known as the Akkadian language. They both use cuneiform script, and from what researchers and etymologists are people or archaeologists who specialize in language, the study of language and how it progresses throughout time. So etymologists see that the writing is very similar. There is like slight differences in maybe writing styles, but they emerged around the same time after the collapse of the Sumerian Empire. So the Babylonians and the Assyrians called their equivalent, or Enki or Ea, Oannes, Oannes. So try to just spell An, Anne, and then add an O before, Oan, but with an S. Oannes was the Babylonian and Syrian god's name. Now, when I say they're very similar, we don't know for a fact how those languages are pronounced or spoke. So they could have used the same language and could have had a complete different phonetic pronunciation, but since they have similar god names, and then we can kind of get like the syllabic syllables for each symbol from the Sumerian, we kind of get how it's pronounced. And we're kind of assuming like ancient Babylonian and ancient Assyrian was an Akkadian language, and they're very similar, and from what we can tell, they're the same language pretty much. Imagine that as like British English and American English. They're the same languages. They have slight different like pronunciations of how they pronounce words. Maybe, perhaps, we don't know for fact, but this is what etymologists are assuming, that how that connects is like, imagine Assyrian and Babylonian being like the same language, and they started from an earlier language, and they just formed their own dialects, and that's how you get other languages. And from there you have like the Hittites, you have the Moabites, the Elamites, and all these people that have cuneiform scripts, and these are all like alphabets are all before Hebrew and Arabic. But anyway, so the next one we have the Canaanite and the Phoenicians. They're very similar. We can go into other ones if you want me to. I can talk about the Elamites and the Moabites and all these other people and what they called their gods, but these ones are going to be most prominent. So the Canaanites and the Phoenicians, they use El and Yah now as their chief god or their creator god, their god that gifted mankind all these gifts of civilization. So Canaanite and Phoenician, they called their god El or Yah. And now, if you know anything about etymology again, which a lot of you probably don't know, the progression of languages and mother tongues and how they progress, I'm just going to tell you now. Canaanite and Phoenician were the two mother tongues that directly influenced modern and traditional Hebrew. So Hebrew stems from a Canaanite and Phoenician root tongue. And then you can see that similarity with the understanding that El in the Hebrew language is or Elohim. Now you know that you see that stupid GoDaddy commercial. I shouldn't say it's stupid. Maybe that girl, but her name is Elohim. That is actually God or deities. Elohim, Eloah. That is the word for God, like for God in the Hebrew language, in the Hebrew tongue. And it was their chief god, the main god. When I see chief god or chief deity, that is the god like of gods in ancient religions. So when I say the chief deity of the Greek mythologies would be Zeus. There's like the 12 main Olympians, the 11 Olympians around him, and then the main god, which was Zeus. So you have the 12, divine number 12. So the chief deity or the chief god was Zeus in Greek, and now the chief god in Canaanite or Phoenician is El or Yah. And now Yahweh is also the name of God. That is God's name. That is what God was, his actual name. He goes by Master, he goes by Lord, he goes by God, but his actual name is Yahweh or Jehovah. Or Jehovah, if you want to anglicize that J into some stupid J noise. But Yahweh and Jehovah were his name. So you get the direct etymological progression and transition, translation, transliteration, however you want to call it, from Canaanite to modern in traditional Hebrew. Now you can also see that we're going to talk about Hittites now. The Hittites had Ebla, Eblas, or As, which was pretty much the same thing. You can see Eblas or As or Aas, Ia, how that Aas kind of coordinates with Ia, Aas. Okay, that's that phonetic progression. Now we're going to talk about the pre-Islamic Arabia Peninsula, which is like Saudi Arabia and stuff like that, the Arabs. Now, before the Abrahamic religion of Islam came from Christianity and Muhammad and all that, they had their own religion. That was a polytheistic pantheon. Just like they had the 12 main gods, they had the chief god was called Allah. Allah, just exactly the same pronunciation. There is no phonetic stresses and syllables that change from Allah, from pre-Islamic to current state of the Arabian Peninsula and surrounding areas of the Arab peoples. So now with all that, these gods also had like connections, like I was saying, and I have to explain what their names are, because we're going to go more into that. Now, we're going to go to the other side of the world, other continents of mostly Central and South America. South America is also called in archaeological terms ancient South America is called Mesoamerica. So we have Central America, North America, which is Canada, U.S. Central America is like Mexico and part of the Panama Canal. And then you have like the Mesoamerica, which was like the Incas and like in the Andes and parts of like Brazil and the Amazonian rainforest area. The Olmecs were all in Mesoamerica. So think of like South America as Mesoamerica, Central America is Central America, North America is North America. So in these Central and South Americans, we're just going to focus on. We're not going to get too much into North American because we can go on forever. This is already at 15 minutes, and I'm just getting done with the introduction. So, some notes here. So, we're talking about plumed serpents or feathered serpents or winged serpents. Now, I was doing some reading, and I was looking back at some of the earlier sites that predate the Sumerians and everybody throughout the world of recent discoveries, and one of them is Gobekli Tepe. And there is these pits, these enclosures with these pillars with these carvings, and they date back to 11,600 years ago, or 9,600 BC, give or take. So on those pillars, there's an enclosure D. Enclosure D has 12 pillars surrounding two main pillars, smaller pillars, and those 12 pillars could represent the 12 constellations, the 12 zodiacs, and yada yada yada, so on and so forth. Like one of them has a lion carved into it, another one has a scorpion carved into it, serpents, birds. And now I'm going to read from this and then tell you my side notes about this. Okay, so this researcher went over to Gobekli Tepe and he noticed it. So it says, it has many remarkable elements as well as the disc. The disc, remember the disc. Both wings of the vulture are shown. I now realize the other stretched out behind its body. To the right of the vulture is a serpent. It has a large triangular head, as do all serpents depicted at Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe, side note, is in the southern part of Turkey, which is just north of the Syrian border. Yeah, I think the Syrian border. But anyways, and its body is coiled into a curve with its tail extending down towards an H-shaped pictogram. The serpent is nestled close to another large bird, not a vulture, but something more like an ibis or ibis, with a long sickle-shaped beak. Now, that bird, ibis or ibis, is the headdress of the Egyptian god Thoth, who was also depicted as a plumed serpent. He was the creator of mankind. He was the god of the sun. You could see that disc above his head in some of the depictions. If you Google Earth him, he has a red disc, or sometimes it's a gold disc hovering above his head, or he's holding it up with his hands. There's different ways they incorporate. There's also in these pillars is a crescent shape. So you have the disc and the crescent shape, which would suggest, in like in many other religions throughout the Middle East, Asia Minor, Europe, the Americas, and so on and so forth, is that disc represents the sun and the crescent shape represents the moon. Between it and the vulture is yet another bird, again with a hooked beak, but smaller, with the look of a chick. And it says, I turn my attention to the disc. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Is that it's meant to represent the sun. Okay, so we have Thoth, who has the disc, who has the plumed feathers, and he was also related to a serpent, and he could fly, and he gifted man with knowledge and laws, and so on and so forth. So here are mine. The headdress, red sometimes, gold disc always present in Thoth's epithets and drawings and carvings. Many gods of Egypt are plumed, winged, feathered serpents. Some plumed serpents throughout Egypt and other religions is like Egypt has Thoth, Nazit Mons, etc. I'm not going to list them all. The Aztecs had Quetzalcoatl, which translates to feathered serpent, winged serpent, or plumed serpent depends on how you translate it. Now the Mayas have 2 or 3 different pronunciations or different things they called that plumed serpent, which the direct translations translate to the exact same thing. So the Mayas, and there's 2 different groups of Mayas. One group is the Mayas that were in the Yucatan Peninsula. So the Yucatanese Mayas called it Kukulkan. So Kukulkan was what they called it in the Yucatan province or peninsula, and the Mayas that were in the what was the name of the? I think I might have it. I can't remember the name of the. Oh, the Quiche. So the Quiche region or a province area of South and Central America was another group of Mayas, and they called that Gukumats, or some transliterations are like Uk Umats with like a K instead of a G, like Ku instead of Gu. So Ku Uk Umats or Gu Uk Kumats. They also call them Tohil or Tohil. So that little bit of information might help you. So when I start giving like different names, so the Quiche and the Yucatan Mayas had different names for them, but they translate both to winged or plumed serpent. Remember that plumed serpent. Remember disc. Remember crescent. Now we have the Incas. The Incas have Viracocha. Viracocha translates to winged serpent, plumed serpent. He did the same thing, brought civilization, knowledge, wisdom, mathematics. The Olmecs have several different gods, but we don't know what they were called. And I should say there is no really good written language. They had petroglyphs or glyphs, and then glyph type of like writing, but there's the Incas, Mayas, and Aztecs were all told by like Viracocha, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, whoever you want to call them. They told them that they can't understand language, so that they took that, like there's a age of golden age men before them that could write, and they could have written language and record, and then that was like the Olmecs. The Olmecs like somehow screwed it up, and then like the people preceding them, the tribes after them, weren't allowed to learn the written language. So when the Spaniards came, they couldn't translate anything that was carved on the walls because it was from an earlier civilization, according to them. Every single one. The Toltecs, the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Incas all said that their gods, or their god took away their written language. But they could only speak and pass on truths and wisdom through oral stories and stuff like that. So with that being said, we don't know what the Olmecs called their gods. We can't translate, and we do know some old translations, but the current god the plume god, you want to look at Olmec, Olmecs, Olmec serpent god, or god number 5. Olmec god number 5, or the Roman numeral V. So god V. So that was what the archaeologists called it. We don't know their name, but it was a plumed serpent, I can assure you. And the Toltecs also had vast similarities with the Aztecs. The Aztecs were actually called the Mexicas, as I've mentioned before in previous videos. Mexica was their real name, which means the anointed ones, and that's where Mexico comes from. Mexico, Mexica. The Spaniards gave the name Aztecs to them, but the Toltecs and the Mexicas had a very similar society and government system and language, because they were both part of Central America, and they kind of like bled into each other. The kingdoms or the tribes bled into each other in parts of Mexico. So they also called their god Quetzalcoatl. So where am I getting with all this? So we can see, like, Here's another thing. Okay, the skills necessary for writing and doing mathematics and all sorts of knowledge known. Oh, sorry. Let me restart that. The skills necessary for writing and doing mathematics and for all sorts of knowledge, how to build cities, found temples, make laws, determine borders, divide land, also how to plant seeds and then to harvest their fruits and vegetables. In short, he taught men all these things conducive to a civilized life. And let's see, that was like an excerpt from something. I can't remember. I don't see where it's from, but somebody from a Spanish conquistador and chronicler wrote that about all these plumed serpent gods, and that's very similar to the gods over in the ancient Near East and Asia Minor and Fertile Crescent. Um, Now here's the amazing thing about Gobekli Tepe. If we go back and see these similarities of these gods, um, uh, so Gobekli Tepe is right nestled between the Euphrates and the Tigris River. And if you know that, like, if you're following any type of Asia Minor, Turkey area, and you know maybe a little bit of geography, not geography, geology, and that is right at the cusp of the Fertile Crescent. If we go back several thousand years ago, 11,600 BC, or 11,600 years ago to 9,600 BC, so to say, Gobekli Tepe was made. And that was at the end of the Pleistocene era, like right in the Great Thaw, after the Great Flood, or during the Great Flood, somewhere time in there. But there is a good indication. So if we see that Gobekli Tepe is right nestled in the north of what we call Mesopotamia, in between the Euphrates and the Tigris River, we can also suggest that maybe the Gobekli Tepe site is a site for the quote-unquote Eden. Maybe that's where the other two rivers of Eden, so to say, have merged, is around there, and that's the earliest site that we know of that is tracking seasonal stars. They weren't just hunter-gatherers. They have suddenly just instantly went from hunting-gathering in the Ice Age to an immediate thaw process after a great flood to instantly knowing how to, like, track the stars and represent the constellations with animals and anthropomorphic representations of those constellations. So that is strong evidence. Gobekli Tepe in Turkey is strong evidence that maybe that's where those two rivers converged. Now, people say that humans started in Africa. How can you say that, like, two different things? We have archaeologists saying that humans started in Africa, and you have people saying civilization started in the Fertile Crescent, which is modern day Iraq, Iran, Turkey area. It's like, how can you have those two contradictory things? They're kind of in the same area, but if you notice how I worded those, that humans came out of Africa doesn't mean they were advanced civilizations. They migrated from there and then developed later on in life. So the first advanced civilization where they made city centers and temples and stuff like that was Sumeria, which was 4,000 some odd years later after Gobekli Tepe. So maybe, since that falls in the Fertile Crescent, that there is something that we're going to have to get into a little bit more. So I just want you to think about that. We have the same figure, and now we're also going to talk about, real quick before I leave, Enki and Ea was symbolized by a double helix serpent with wings, a sort of like a prototype to the caduceus. The caduceus is the two serpents intertwined in a double helix fashion around a sword, or a rapier, I think is what it's called. is like a small sword or a rapier, which is a fighting, like you get what that is, with wings on top. So that's the medical symbol, and that was Enki's symbol in the same concept. He was a chief medical officer, a chief scientist, so to say. He gifted all those things I read. He was very good at diking rivers and essentially terraforming things. So this guy is being recorded as the creator, the starter of civilizations, the the bestower of wisdom and knowledge to humans. He is the founder and the creator of civilized human beings. Um, but so Enki or Ea was also called Satam. Satam, Satan. Satam means administrator, the administrator of knowledge, the administrator of knowing, the administrator of wisdom. He was a very smart god. He basically, but so you can see Satan, Satam. Now another note, it says uh, that little excerpt about building cities and founded temples and making laws and stuff like that. That plumed serpent responsibility, or that characteristic. This applies to all winged serpents, serpents of all the across the globe in all religions. So serpents give knowledge, such as Satan giving knowledge to Adam and Eve, gifting man with knowledge. So the serpents in all pantheons and all religions, no matter what, are the ones who gift human beings with knowledge and wisdom. So you can see another connection there, and that goes for all continents across the globe. Um, so we have phonetic similarities. I would like to talk about how Yah, Yahweh also is related to, it comes from other parts. You can see Yahweh pop up into the like the other pantheons of earlier times, like Enlil was Enki's younger half brother. He was the god of the skies. He was called Yahweh in that religion. Yah or Yahweh is just as like the Canaanites and the Hebrews and the Jews or whatever, but like he was called Yahweh, just like Yahweh. So we have Enlil and Enki representing Satan and God. You can see that happening. And throughout time, like one became bad and one became good, but usually their stories are actually intermeshing of the two gods. They're pretty much the same. They have like uh like some parts were like all the bad parts of Enlil was taken and put and given to Enki, and all the good parts of Enki was taken and given to Enlil, and then you have the creation of Yahweh and the creation of Satan or Satan. So it's just, I don't know, maybe that's evidence of early humans picking and choosing what they wanted their gods to be, and there's obvious flaws, and they're doing a refinement to their spirituality. I don't know, but these are things I want you all to kind of like uh, ponder, because we're going on 35 minutes or 34 minutes, and I don't have a lot of graphic design and graphic information for you to look and review. So I'm just going to cut you off there. If you guys have questions about my knowledge, or if you found a loophole in my knowledge, or something that is not entirely accurate that you might know, accurate, that you guys might notice, please send me a message or a comment with a nice polite correction. I am open to open criticism and positive debate. As long as we keep our cool, we can have a positive debate, and we can criticize each other in a healthy way. So I love you guys. I'll talk to you guys later.